Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back. Today, our guest on the Future Thinkers podcast is Miriam Martineau, who is a counselor, a teacher, and the founder of Next Step Integral. For the last 15 years, she's studied and researched parenting as a spiritual practice. Miriam and her husband Stefan also lived in an intentional community called Morning Star for 10 years, from 92 to 2002, which they founded in rural BC, Canada. In this episode, we're going to talk about the practical aspects of running an intentional community, attracting the right people in the early stages, and dealing with bad actors, as well as raising children to adopt the values of community.
For all the links and show notes, go to futurethinkers.org/134. And to get access to the full podcast episode, group calls, courses, and lots of other great features, become a member at futurethinkers.org/members. And before we get into the show, we have an announcement about the Smart Village project. The deal to purchase the property where we were hoping to build the village unfortunately fell through, so now we're back to the land search. We're still looking for land in the Kootenays, BC, Canada, and we've created a form for crowd searching the land at futurethinkers.org/land search. At the top, there is a link to a presentation about the project and also the detailed criteria of what we're looking for. If you know of any suitable properties for sale in the Kootenays area, especially those that are not publicly listed, you can help us out by filling out that form. Okay, now let's get into the show. Miriam, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you for bringing me in.
Yeah, so a lot of questions today. I'd love to pick your brain about kind of the practical aspects of running a community. You ran one called Morning Star for 10 years. And, we'd love to ask you about your reflections on that. So,
do you want to start with a stronger question there?
Yes,
it's a bit of a slow start.
Well, the first question that I'm most interested in is, what did you find was kind of the unexpected really good thing about running a community and the unexpected bad thing that most people don't really think about?
Okay. The unexpected good thing. I mean, there were a lot of unexpected good things, although we were expecting good things too. I would say probably the most profound one, and I think it had quite a lot to do with our intention at the start. And I would say large doses of grace. I actually think a lot of it was not up to us. But and so our intention, maybe I'll backtrack a little bit. Our intention was in a way twofold. One was we were building a community based on a very clear sense and vision that Stefan, my husband, had, that there is an untapped potential, a collaborative potential, when people come together, really resting in their true self, that there is an other in the midst that can emerge. That is more than the sum total. So if you have 10, it's not just 10 people, it's actually 10 plus. So, that can sound a little esoteric, and in a way, maybe it is. And yet, in the first few weeks, we felt like we literally entered that collective state together. So very much at the onset, that's why I say I feel like there was a lot of intention, there was a lot of care put into the beginning of the community, but the fact that it felt like it landed, like we actually got a real taste of being both sovereign and being together, and then this other presence being there that felt like it had its own will, its own intelligence, its own direction, and that we could be in relationship to it. That actually felt like grace. And it's interesting because it happened for the first, I'd say, around 2 weeks, maybe because we were all so eager, and here we go, and we kind of launched. And then after that, I'd say the next decade, in a way, were a journey of unpacking, trying to get clear on what are the ingredients, what's the recipe for that to happen, so that it doesn't just remain a state that comes and goes, and can be a bit more predictable, and that we can work towards. It can become more of a stage. And so that was a lot of then the inquiry, over a decade of experimenting different practices and methods. But yeah, I would say that was maybe the best, and of course we tapped into that here and there at other times in other formations and configurations. As far as what was maybe, I don't know how you said, the hardest or the least fun. Like, all in all, it was a really good experience. I actually want to say that, because you hear so many stories of communities falling apart, and it's hard, and it's a disappointment. It didn't feel like that for us. It actually was a very graceful unfolding at the end, and a really conscious step we took, which we can get to if you want later on. I'd say maybe the piece that felt the most burdensome was that over time it felt that if Steph and I were kind of like the mom and the papa of the community, and we were really hoping that it would be held more fully by others with a similar degree of commitment and capacity and passion, and so I think that was maybe over time what felt like a piece that we wish could have changed. And then, of course, back to what I said was the best part was, it felt like we were hitting in a way a ceiling, as in we kept, finding that collaborative potential as a state experience, but we weren't able to shift it over into a stage. And that, in a way, is why we're still in the inquiry and still at it in other ways to this day, because it feels like a code that needs to get cracked for the future of humanity to actually have a path forwards.
Can you explain the difference between a stage and a state?
Yes. So a state, in my experience, and also building on integral theory, is it's fleeting. It's like we enter and exit different states of consciousness throughout the day. Even from sleepy to awake, or alert, or excited, or downtrodden, or disappointed. So there's an emotional quality also to a lot of states. And they come and they go. So if you have a deep meditation, you can feel like you're in a very awakened, connected state. If you've just had some emotional turbulence, you might feel like in a much more regressive state of consciousness. So the big thing is they come and go. And I've often likened a heightened state to be one, whether that's through spiritual practice or through a whole bunch of other possible methods, but it's like getting picked up and put on the top of a mountain or somewhere higher up the mountain. And you get gifted with this view, with this experience of what's possible. And in a way, it's a lived experience of a potential that is inherent in you, or between you and others. But then the state, because it's fleeting, it comes and then it goes. And so then while you can gain insight and enthusiasm and inspiration from a state, you end up back on the path that it's almost like we're walking up a mountain, and each of us is somewhere along that path. And so after the state has gone, you end up where you are actually on the path, which is the stage, which is the much more the structure of consciousness that you have attained through your growing up, your maturing, your integration, your life practices. So stage would, it's often likened to, like, once you've learned how to ride a bike, you don't usually unlearn it. Like, that could be like, it's a developmental place that you've reached that you can rely on. And then I think with states and stages, it's interesting to consider heightened ones, but also ones that we can regress to, which we often forget. When we're talking community, we often think of together, the more brilliant times. But if you want to be discerning around community, then you also want to notice how low will people fall under duress. One of my mantras over the last few years in contemplating community and our human capacity is, can someone be decent under duress? I think it's a really important question, and as important as how conscious is someone. And they don't always go together, interestingly.
Mm-hmm. My curiosity about this is that the goal of a community like this, to kind of graduate people through stages? And, how would a community approach doing something like that? And should it be? That's kind of my first question, is should it be the goal?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I don't think there's one answer to it. I actually think it depends, right? Because community can exist for all kinds of reasons. My husband was helping build a co-housing community just north of where we live. And that is basically, it has some intention to it. It's a wonderful neighborhood, but it's not trying to reach, it's not trying to tap into evolving our collaborative potential. I mean, it is doing it in some ways, but it's really coming together around some shared values and creating a beautiful neighborhood together. So I think the why does one engage in community is a really important question. What is the aim? And there can be many. And it's so important to be attentive to what it is so that you're not setting yourself up for expectations that you didn't even have at the onset, and they just kind of crept in upon you. The reason we've been so interested in community, I mean, partly I think it's just, when Steph and I met, we were in our early 20s, and independently of each other, we had both had the sense that the way into the future is through collectives learning how to collaborate and evolve together without losing their sovereignty. And we had seen versions where there's a very strong sense of the collective, but if you would speak to the individuals, it felt like there had been a loss in the individual. There'd been a bowing down to a dogma or a teacher or a teaching or a religious path, for example. So it felt like when you spoke with the individual, it's like, where are you? Like, where are your thoughts? You're always just quoting the book or the teacher. And then we also had experiences, and we did 2 kind of pilgrimages then in the next 2 decades where we visited a lot of communities. And that was, again, repeated this sense that there's also communities where the individuals are very strong, quite empowered and sovereign and sort of living their life, but they're struggling hugely to have a sense of togetherness, and that down to simple things like they would say, we try to have a weekly meditation together and we do it, but no one ever shows up. And so you'd have this pulse and that pulse, and our sense was always there's a third way, and that feels like the breakthrough that we haven't seen happen much, and we have not yet seen it. And so if anyone listening knows of where it's happening as a stage, please let me know, because we have experienced it as a state. We think it's possible and very necessary as a stage. But like I said, we haven't come across it yet. We're working on helping create it. And that is where there is this deep sense of coherence amongst people and shared intention and shared values and a shared path. But there is no loss whatsoever in the sovereignty of each individual. If anything, the uniqueness of each person is even uplifted and encouraged. And so it's like a third path in a way. It's not this, it's not that, it's something else. And one of the keys that we did discover ourselves, and I'm sure many other people have discovered, is that in our experience, the only way to get to that third way is actually through spiritual growth and maturation in your intrapersonal discernment, like in your knowing who you are, where are you coming from in any moment, because it actually takes you resting in your true self or your authentic self or your essence, or whatever word you might want to give that. But that aspect of yours that is not defined by your biography, that is not identified with being separate from others, and yet is intrinsically and uniquely itself. So that non-rivalrous, deeply present self is when we're there, it seems to be the key to being able to be fully present with others, listening for the threads of truth and joy and collaborative potential without getting into the rivalrous, even if very subtle and very sophisticated me against you, that kind of crashes the whole thing. And allows each person to really thrive and flourish for who they are. So yeah, that's one of the big keys. And it takes usually quite a bit of maturing for us to get to that intrapersonal discernment of who am I, where am I coming from in any moment, to recognize that, not to have it nailed perfectly, but when it matters, in a sense, to leave the ego habits at the door, or if they roll in, to have an effective practice of how to work with them so they don't sabotage the effort, the collective effort.
Yeah, what you're pointing to, it seems very alien in Western society. I don't think that it's a common thing to see that kind of, people being fully expressed in what they are, while also not being in a lot of competitive dynamics. You see a lot of self-expression maybe with artists, but there's other dynamics in play where they are competing for attention, and they are often trying to be weirder to outdo each other and gain more audience members or something like that. So it's hard to imagine a person like that. But if you could point to somebody who embodies that, can you maybe give some examples of what that looks like?
I feel like it would be worth all of us, myself, you guys, and whoever's listening, to really consider, because I think we have accessed it as a state. Humanity has actually tapped into that as a state. So while I can think of I'll name one person after I've finished this, who I feel quite confident was really embodying that. And he just died quite recently, but I actually want to make it a more normal in a way. Like, yes, it's not common, and yet it's very accessible. It's not, this is something I always challenge myself too, because it's easy to think of it like far away over on another continent. It's going to take my life to get there. And yet in my experience, it literally is this, it's a remembering. It's already like that capacity already exists in all of us. And it's much more like this tiny little shift of remembering it, and coming home to that. So I would imagine that each of us within ourselves and in people we have witnessed have seen and noticed it as a state, and some of the pointers would be, when were you last feeling fully alive, without being concerned about what other people are thinking about you, in a way, a sense of freedom of, and it could have just been a moment where you just danced wildly in the living room, or where you stretched out and breathed fresh air when you stepped outside, or when you were so engaged in a conversation or working on a project with someone that what you were doing really came alive, and in a way you forgot that self-concern that is so much part of feeling separate from one another. Or where you cared more about something working than about, was it you or the other person who made it work? So I would in a way like to challenge us all to consider when we felt that within ourselves, and when we've noticed it in other people as a state, just to bring it a little closer. That while it does sound alien, it's not that far away. And then the person that I do think was just such a beautiful embodiment of it was this Benedictine monk called Father Thomas Keating, that Stefan and I had the honor of interviewing. It was on one of our pilgrimages where we were traveling around and visiting a lot of communities. And so that was in 2003, I think. But he really felt like he was embodying he was himself, and there was not this even subtle sense of rivalry. Like, he was caring so deeply about humanity, and holding in a way both the deep love for us humans as we are now, and this in a way stretching hope, evolutionary spirit of, and we can become more generous, more loving, more kind, more embodied, more present to one another and to nature and to this whole cosmic adventure we're on. And it's one thing to notice that, when you have an interview with someone, I always think to discern anyone fully, and I might be slow, but it takes me about a year. I like to witness someone through the 4 seasons and see them in daily life and through the ins and outs of life, because it's easy for me, for you guys, for all of us to show up as our best selves, in a podcast interview or or a visit, an afternoon visit, or even a 2-week retreat. And it's that longer time period of watching one another, also under duress and stress, and in a way allowing life to offer the challenges and then see how we all show up, that allows for deeper discernment, I think, of both the potential and the beautiful heightened states we can access, and our potential as humans, but also, our shadows, and what kind of trauma trips each of us up, and where is it hardest for each of us to stay regulated when we are in the middle of tension.
I have a very felt sense of what we're describing in this conversation, but not a lot of words to describe it. I mean, like, people are looking for, us included, are looking for some sort of rule set or a set of projects or a set of values that can be documented and then discussed in a group and, create some sort of operating system for this thing. And maybe that's a little bit more my thinking about it than Yuvi's, but there's something about this that, to me, the word that comes to mind is space and listening. We've been studying and discussing the concept of stigmergy, this process of how you engage with the environment and what kind of consciousness the environment will put you into just naturally by engaging with it. And what keeps coming back to me is that the goal of a community is really about community. It's about raising children. It's about having space to develop the individual into something more than what it is, and develop the community, and to be both a retreat but also like a lab or a workshop to build. So yeah, there's something about having no goals in this kind of environment that to me is very attractive, that seems to be the right kind of breeding ground. Do you know what I mean? Like, to not have an end goal for this village, but to be in process in the village rather than a state that everyone gets to in the end. Like, to be in the process of being a villager.
I love that. I often talk about that we are two things as humans. We're human beings and human becomings. And in a way, when you said, it's like looking at the village as something that is becoming while it is also being. And I didn't mention this at the beginning, but the twofold focus of Morningstar Community was what we just spent a little bit of time on. And then simultaneously, it was our sense that we literally need to ground this vision, this potential that so many are feeling, that life on earth can be more wholesome. It can have greater integrity. It can be connecting your spirit and your mind and your body and your soul and your hands and your will. It doesn't need to be so pulled apart in many directions. There's a wholesomeness that is possible. And so the sort of the big second lens we had on that decade of living together with others was, how can, ideally each moment become an expression of that? In a way, how can doing the dishes be a prayer? How can changing your child's diaper be meditation? How can growing a garden together give rise to that sense of both agency and communion combined, even without words? How can it actually land? Because there is quite a bit, I find, of theory and visioning and ideas and dreams, and that's all beautiful. And I think that's often where new stages of development in humanity start, right? It's often the artists are picking up on things and starting to put them in image and music and movies. But as we see what's happening around the globe, if anything, it feels like it's becoming more and more pressing that we can start bringing those dreams, those visions, those hopes of a saner version of how we live together, that we can bring these to earth and give them hands and feet and land them in a way. And so, a large motivation for the work Steph and I have been engaged in now for a long time has been, can we help create living examples, living, breathing, dynamic, evolving examples. Like villages is a word we've used a lot. Like, can we create sane villages that offer in a way, it's like if someone comes to visit, it doesn't have to get conceptual. It's almost a remembering, because the knowing that it's possible actually already lives in all of us. So it's much more an offering of a cellular experience, and a sense, in a way. I know it can sound a little cliche, but like a sense of coming home. Like can the with yeah. I think I've said enough for now around that.
There's something to me about the philosophy of Stoicism that is super relevant here when it comes to state and process. Like there's, in discussing these different eco village or intentional community processes with other people who have started them, I do see a lot of crossover when it comes to like envisioning this idealistic, wholesome community and like holding to some sort of vision and then creating bureaucracy to try and enforce that vision. And then the inevitable disappointment and fights and all that kind of stuff when people fail to achieve that mission, when individuals and the community both fail at it. And so applying Stoicism to this, there's this sense of everything there is a project, and it can be an attractive project. It can be something fun that we can come together and work on as we're attracted to it. But there's no need for it to succeed. And we're not like matching ourselves up to some vision that is impossible or incredibly difficult to achieve. Just being there and working on the environment is enough. So that's where I'm trying to go with this, is like these heightened expectations about places like this, I think, contributes to the failure of them. Would you say that's true?
There's two things I'd like to mention. I'd say yes, and it's yes and because I think there's a certain benchmark we've reached that we can fairly predictably manage as humans, right? We actually have societies, we have civilizations that, work. There's tons of problems, but I'm always amazed. I mean, have you ever had that thought? You go to a city and you're like, every day it's like functioning, and you're like, how on earth is this working? Like, there's so many parts that need to play together for this thing to actually work and not fall into chaos. And I think, if anything, this last year has maybe shown us how quickly things could move into chaos, especially in our sort of area of the world. Like mostly things work quite well. So I think there's some things we can there's some places where you can go, no, this type of living together we can manage. Where there are basically rules and regulations of how you need to behave so that, you don't go at each other and you behave well and people have enough individual freedom and can do what they want to do. There is something that I think is calling. I think it's actually calling from the future. I love that your podcast is called Future Thinkers. Like, I actually think one can be in relationship to the future, and the future is sometimes whispering, sometimes nudging, sometimes calling a possibility that is actually, it's different, it's new, it is of a different order. And that's why I said yes, and because when something's really new, like it takes everything we have and then some more. I wouldn't want to shrink that down and just go, well, we're just going to kind of bumble along and we'll figure it out. And this is just how it is. We're just messy humans. Like, and I agree. I actually agree with that. But I want to add the and I feel deeply in myself. And I've experienced it in pockets and in moments and in certain connections and relationships. And I'm really passionate about this, that there's a culture that we can create together where we can actually work with those messy, chaotic, in a way, vulnerable human aspects of who we are without losing the vertical stretching, and we can take this further kind of energy. And that's what I'm curious about, where it's not in a way flattening to, well, this is as good as it's going to get, so let's not have those high expectations, and also not getting so hung up on, I don't want to deal with the messiness of human collectives. So I just want to kind of hold on to this ideal and never get there. It's like, can we actually bring those two together? And I do think we can. And I think we do have a lot of insights and ingredients at our fingertips of how we can make that happen.
You know, when I'm describing this, I'm realizing as well that there might be something off about how I'm describing it, or like, well, you know, when I make that sort of stoic practice primary in my consciousness, you know, to remind myself not to be attached to the result, and kind of find some even ground of just comfort with where I am, there's this other part of me that starts engaging more strongly than ever before, which is the compulsion to do something fun or engaging, or to build, or, you know, to kind of clear out the bullshit of all the things I'm worrying about and stressed about, and then go for the thing that's most awesome that I could be doing. And, you know, for the moment right now, it's about building a village, like building environments, building stuff with, you know, CNC machines and 3D printers and stuff like that, and like learning AutoCAD and all of this stuff like that. When I chill out and stop stressing about things, that becomes primary. And I don't know if that's for other people. Like, do you two share that experience at all?
I'm not sure if I'm getting it exactly the way that you describe it, but if I were to rephrase it, how it works for me, I would say that when I am not in a state of anxiety, there's more room for emergence of my potential.
How about you?
Is that kind of how you meant it?
It sounds like your expression of it, but yeah, it sounds right.
I mean, I would completely agree. And I think in a way you're talking about bringing that, you know, in my words, the horizontal, in a way that the compassion, the love, the warmth, it's already okay. You're already unconditionally allowed to be who you are. Like, it gives such a relaxation to the system. So in a way, I think that is the intrinsic human ground upon which we thrive. And this goes all the way to attachment theory, and what your little guy is hopefully experiencing, right? Is like this big welcome mat to him of like, welcome to this earth. We're so glad you're here. You know, like a deep sense of safety and appreciation and joy that he exists. And from that then naturally springs the emergent nature of the human being to try out things, to discover. If he didn't have that, he wouldn't be out exploring. He'd be much more concerned about, am I accepted? Am I attached? Am I allowed to exist here? So I think that what you were describing for me is very much actually bringing those two together. And this is where I think the kind of culture or the containers that we need to inhabit together to allow both that vertical, emergent, evolutionary spirit to come about, and the sense of safety and relaxation and well-being. They're truly, they need each other. One without the other is actually makes the whole experiment impossible. And that's where I think we have so many tools now. Like, it's a psycho-spiritual approach. You know, if you want to, in a way, the horizontal is like, what do we psychologically need to be well as humans within ourselves and with each other? The spiritual impulse, in a way, is, and how can we keep waking up, and how can we keep becoming more conscious and more creative, and how can we be more innovative? And one without the other doesn't work. Well, I think we've seen so many examples where one with the other really doesn't work.
Yeah, I think I'm getting it. It's the, you know, the kind of ideas about what makes humans grow. One is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's like, well, we need to have all of these different needs met on all these different levels, and then we can self-actualize and self-transcend. And then the other theory is more the Claire Graves' Spiral Dynamics, where like it takes a crisis to make somebody transition to the next stage. And I think it's not either or, it's both and.
As I was just going to say, it's, in my view, it takes both what I call challenge and support for a human being to thrive. And if there's too much support, as in it's all here, it's all given, there's not enough friction, there's not enough stress on the system, one can become complacent and stagnant. And if there is too much challenge and too much stimulus and too much expectation, then one can get completely stressed out, and that kind of collapses too. And the interesting thing is the particular combination of how much support and how much challenge any human being needs at any point in time changes, even within a day and within a lifetime. So a newborn, in my view, really, that first year is mostly just about support, offering support, big doses of support, because there's already plenty of inherent challenges, as in suddenly you're a human in a body and you have to learn how to digest and how to deal with different temperature and and how to move and coordinate. And there's so many challenges, you really don't need to add any other to the mix. So the parenting in that first year is like, here you are, sweetheart, let us support you as much as possible. But then if it stays like that, you would see a child would actually not develop optimally if there was never any challenge. And then there's the other version where a lot of children are overly challenged way too soon, and then there is a shutdown, and there is often some really sad consequences from that too. So definitely both. Yeah.
This is interesting because we're getting into the territory of, this stuff starts very early. We talk about building communities for adults who already have their attachment style, who already come with their, baggage and their trauma and their childhood development, and how to manage all those different things, between people who come from different backgrounds. It can be difficult, but if we talk about sort of starting from scratch and how do we raise children, both as parents and as a community, to me, it seems like that's a bit of a different thing, because we aren't coming with that baggage. Well, we have our own baggage, but, the new person is not necessarily coming with that baggage.
Yeah, I love the different lenses that you're lighting up there, because in a way, for me, one of the key lenses in building a village, building a community, is to take on the lens of what kind of village is most conducive to a child growing up and thriving and flourishing, so that they don't need to get over their childhood, so that their childhood is actually a foundation from which they can grow and develop optimally from. And I think it's a beautiful lens, because you're looking through the lens of a little person that is a human. And so everything that is part of a village, in a way, is part of that human. And it offers, in a way, a very refreshed look at everything. And in a way, I think whenever you're creating a village, you have this opportunity, same with when you're creating a family, to recreate culture, to look at everything that we've brought with us, but rather than doing secondhand parenting or secondhand villaging or secondhand community building, you get to, in a way, look at everything and go, are we going to bring it to the dump? Are we going to recycling it? Or are we going to take it along? And to do that with our habits, with our ways of engaging with each other, with our ways of raising children, with our ways of growing food, of dealing with conflict and communication and technology, et cetera, like everything that we bring, we can go, is this something, that needs transformation? It needs a little tweaking, it needs recycling, or is it really something we actually leave behind? And then what is new? What is emergent in that space? So that lens, I think, is absolutely gorgeous, looking through the eyes of what kind of village would be conducive for the child. I think it's an excellent lens to have. And at the same time, to remember, a child could be raised as consciously as ever, and perfection does not exist. It literally, I've never seen it. I don't think it exists. I actually don't think that's the point. So to remember that, and that can actually relieve a bit of stress also, because because otherwise it can be like, oh my God, we're never going to get this village right. And you have, of course, adults who, like you pointed out, UV, have had their own childhood and come with their own luggage. And so there, I think it's much better to assume that there will be challenges and struggles and problems. It's much better to assume that rather than to go, we are going to create this village where everything is picture perfect and nobody ever behaves off. And, much better to assume, because I have never met a single person without shadow, and I've never met a single person without some trauma. I think being human means that we are somewhat traumatized. And it definitely means that we have shadow. And so if we could just pre-assume that and then get much more interested in, and now how are we going to work with that? What kind of culture are we going to create so that when these things happen and wobble the whole thing, we can work with them in a way that both, it doesn't push away, it actually does it on a foundation of love and kindness and compassion, because one person's stuff is not really just their stuff, it's actually everybody's stuff. How can we really come at it from a place of love and connection, and then because it's on the base of connection, actually be also quite clear and concise and forthright, like very open and direct about how to work with it. And I think we often hesitate with the directness and the clarity because there's an association with giving direct feedback or receiving it of separation. But what if that didn't need to be the case, and the culture was actually, again, bringing two things together that are usually, it's almost like the energy of yes, of connection, of enthusiasm, of I get you, of empathy. It's kind of over here, and the energy of clarity and feedback and truth and boundaries, is kind of over here. And I always think, no, we need to do this. You actually, the basis is unconditional seeing, hearing, receiving, being present to one another. And then the no's, the boundaries, the clarity, the feedback is just placed as needed, but within this much bigger container. And that is something I think we don't see hardly at all. And I think it's a huge thing in parenting and relationship, and then in village building too.
All right, we're going to stop here. And in the second part of the interview, we focus on parenting as a spiritual practice. To access the full interview with Miriam Martineau, become a Future Thinkers member at futurethinkers.org/members. To find all the links and show notes for this episode, go to futurethinkers.org/134.
And to help us with the property search for the Future Thinker Smart Village, go to futurethinkers.org/land search. We'll see you in the next episode.
If you like this content, you might want to check out our 7 Ways to Adapt to the Future guidebook. Get it for free at futurethinkers.org/signup. You might also want to check out our Future Thinkers membership area. We have courses there to help you adapt to the changing world, build resilience, upgrade culture and society, and create meaning and purpose in your life. As well, you'll get access to our community, all of our unreleased content, private Zoom calls, live Q&As with guests, workshops and events, and more. Just go to members.futurethinkers.org. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and comment. It really helps out our show more than you know. And if you want more like it, then subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified of new videos. See you next time.